Hey there, welcome back to Midas Letter Live. I've got a regular guest in the chair opposite me. Charles Taerk is the manager of the
Ninepoint UIT Alternative Health Fund.
That is a mouthful, and that is a fund that we've been following with interest because why don't we start with performance this time?
Yeah, sure. Very happy. Just finished our 6-month number. Year to date, the fund is up close to 10%, 9.37%,
Wow.
which is great relative to the passive ETFs and the index, which I think are still negative on the year. So we're very, very pleased with that. We're actively managed. We're buying some privates. We can own up to 10% in private equity. And we can hold cash occasionally when the market is weak. So I think that combination gives people a good risk-adjusted way to be in the cannabis space.
Okay, let me ask you, is this a long-only fund or do you also entertain short strategies?
I know we're a long-only fund.
Oh, okay.
So
you're
our
the
short,
white hats.
Our short is we can go to cash.
Right,
But
okay.
yeah, we're not shorting.
Interesting. There's been some great developments in the U.S. Last week, the FDA approved the first ever cannabis drug, and it is a treatment for epilepsy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so we talked about it a month or so ago, back in April. GW Pharma is the name of the company. They're a UK biopharmaceutical company listed on NASDAQ.
Okay.
And they have a drug called Epidolex that's gone through clinical trials. The FDA Advisory Committee voted unanimously in April to recommend it to the FDA to give it a drug identification number, a DIN. And it would be basically blessed as a medicine, not a cannabis medicine.
Right.
And so at the end of June, the FDA did it, and that was shocking. So they made Epidolex a drug fully approved by the FDA.
Wow.
And that has significant ramifications. There's a lot of dominoes that are now going to fall based on Epidolex and its leadership.
Wow.
So
interesting. So that seemed to happen in an accelerated basis because usually the FDA doesn't it take years to get a drug through that process?
Well, yeah, it depends on the types of medication and the types of trials that that have been taking place.
Okay.
But the dominoes that are going to fall are really significant, both in the U.S. and around the world. So this is the first botanical cannabis medication to get a DIN, and that means that this product, Epidolex, will be available for drug benefit plans and healthcare coverage, widely distributed.
So this is as legitimate as cannabis can get in terms of the medical world.
And doctors understand that when a drug gets a DIN, it's based on the efficacy and the results of its clinical trials. So doctors now become more comfortable with the prescription related to this medication. It treats a certain form of epilepsy.
Okay.
And so very, very significant both for the drug, for the company, and for U.S. regulators, because now with the FDA approving it, we turn our attention to what the Drug Enforcement Agency may have to do, which is potentially deschedule marijuana. It's been a controlled substance, a Schedule I controlled narcotic for many years, and it was based on the fact that marijuana had no medicinal value. Well, now the FDA dispels that, and so what does the DEA do? And so we just think it's another major step forward in terms of reducing the stigma, reducing the regulatory rigidity in the United States.
Right, so that's going to likely catalyze a lot more new drugs derived from cannabis coming out of the entire medical community.
Correct, yes.
Interesting. Do you think that is in and of itself, would you consider that a value catalyst for the sector generally?
Well, I think it should be. You've seen that the GW Pharma's stock price was doing quite well in the lead to the announcement, and then it's sold off a bit. I think that's probably because people see that it's going to be about 90 days before the drug hits the market. Okay. But by and large, I think you're right that going forward, the companies that are spending more time and effort and attention on R&D and clinical trials, there's going to be some long-term benefits there.
Sure. Do you think that this will have any sort of impact on the federal legislative process towards deprohibition of cannabis?
Yeah, but one never knows when we talk about the federal level of government in the United States.
Right.
There are lots of legislative changes going on, including Senior Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, who has tabled legislation or is about to table legislation to legalize marijuana at the federal level. Whether it gets through the House and the Senate still remains to be seen, but the discussions are ongoing.
It's not as if all of the states are aligned in favor of legalization.
No, that's true. There's 30 states right now that have a legal framework for some form of cannabis, whether it's medical and or recreational. Only 9 states have a recreational legalization strategy. So it's those other 20 states that may cause problems to get a federal legalization plan going.
Sure. Okay, so what other companies in the U.S. have you been looking at?
Well, when we look at the United States, we think it's important that investors know that each state isn't created equal.
Right.
There are different licensing regimes. Some states limit the number of licenses they're issuing. Other states are more open and egalitarian. So you've got to do your homework and understand the different markets as well. Each state covers, when it's a medical legalization,
Yep.
each state covers certain ailments.
Okay.
So it may not necessarily be chronic pain everywhere, it may not necessarily be epilepsy everywhere, and you've got to know the different markets. So the other aspect of this is there's an opiate crisis in the United States. It's well known in the media, and one of the states has actually come out and tabled legislation that is basically focused at opiate users. And it's actually the state of Illinois, and they've said, we want to help those opiate users because the number of deaths from overdose from opiates is higher than heroin, about 2 to 1 in the state of Illinois. Close to 2,000 people in 2017 died because of overdose from opiates.
Wow.
So what they've done is they've said, let's recognize the problem, and we're allowing those opiate users, those with prescriptions, to switch to cannabis medication, again, under certain circumstances and going through the proper protocols, but they would be able to switch to medical cannabis. So that's significant in the state of Illinois, and it will probably, we'll probably see that form of legislation in other states.
Wow. So on that note, Charles, is there any companies operating in Illinois that stand to become benefactors somehow of such an initiative?
Yes. So we've invested in Green Thumb Industries, GTII on the CSE.
Okay.
We were fortunate enough to meet them when they were a private company back in April, and they did a pre-public round at $7.75 a share. They then went public, and what was really interesting was shortly after the private round, they were awarded additional licenses. So GTI is in 7 states. They're based in Illinois and Chicago, but operate in 7 states now. They just were awarded 5 licenses in Ohio. 5 licenses in Ohio, and they're also in Illinois, Maryland, Nevada, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Florida, in addition to Ohio. They've got 50 retail locations across the U.S. in those states, and those would be considered more highly regulated states. I mentioned earlier where each state is a little bit different. There's going to be different regimes, different ailments that are covered in each state, and different limitations on licenses. So they're in some really good states, and the Illinois benefit with the opiate replacement legislation could be significant for GTI.
Okay, so are they growers and retailers, or
Yep,
what exactly?
well, so that's a great point. They cultivate, and they also have distribution. So they're cultivating and processing and manufacturing everything from flour to topicals and edibles. They also have their own banner of stores under the Rise trademark. And what's interesting is that their products are available in their dispensaries as well as other company dispensaries. So they're getting really significant distribution in the 7 states they're regulated in.
Fascinating. So it seems to me like the U.S. is heading towards federal legalization. Canada, we've got 10 million feet of planned production. Are you concerned at all that at some point in the future we're going to hit a supply excess that is going to start to negatively impact marijuana pricing and maybe catalyze a bit of a trimming down of the available supply.
Trimming.
Yes.
That's good. I don't think that that's that in the short term. No.
Okay.
I think that there's too much discussion. I think at the media level about planned capacity, and it's good to know the plan. It's good to know that the large companies have ideas, plans, and capital available to build hundreds of thousands or millions of square feet. But those are going to take months and years to cultivation. What we need to look at first is what's current capacity. So the annual current capacity of the Canadian LPs, or the Americans, is a set number. To take it tenfold, and because that's what we're talking about,
Sure.
is going to take a lot of capital and a lot of time. In the meantime, the market is going to be expanding. There will be a shift over time from just dried bud to extracts for consumer products, whether it's beverages, edibles, topical creams. And the ratio of dried bud to extract, in terms of the number of kilos to make oil, is like 10 to 1.
Yeah.
So I'm not so sure that we're going to have oversupply in the near term. I think that as the market matures, there'll be considerable demand that outweighs supply for the foreseeable future. But then we're going to also see global markets. So I'm not so sure that we're going to see commoditization in the near term. I think that over the next 2-3 years, we may get there, but we may be pleasantly surprised.
The sector generally has sort of cooled a bit since the Canadian royal assent of Bill C-45 legalizing cannabis for recreational purposes. Is the sort of bloom come off the rose for investors generally, in your opinion, or is this merely a sort of calm after the storm, a sell-off on the news?
Right. I think it's a short term. There's still very exciting news to come, many catalysts in Canada and around the world. In Canada, we're now going to wait and see the larger provincial supply agreements are going to be coming out. So that'll be interesting to see who the winners are. So that'll be a catalyst. Certainly to see the rec strategies being rolled out when stores open October 17th. That'll be something that will be significantly watched and anticipated. The GW Pharma news in the US, that drug hits the market in the fall. So there's still quite a bit of positive news to come. The activity on the capital markets side is also very robust. There are a number of US companies that are seeking wider capital distribution going public, and it's the Canadian markets that are the desired area for going public, given the federal regime we have. So I think you're going to constantly see more companies coming to Canada to list, and there'll be more opportunity to invest. But by and large, this is a 5 to 10 year story. This industry is not going away. And as we saw with prohibition in the 30s and 40s, that business continues to grow significantly. So we see this. We have to remember the future of the cannabis industry is not smokable. It's a consumer products category, and will be infringing on many industry incumbents going down the road.
Sure. Charles, we're going to leave it there for now. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Okay, thanks for having me on.